The Montana ranch stretched endlessly under storm clouds, abandoned for 20 years since her grandmother's mysterious disappearance. Sarah Martinez gripped her swollen belly as contractions started early, trapped miles from the nearest hospital by washed-out roads. The old barn seemed like her only shelter. Inside, her flashlight revealed something impossible, a hidden elevator behind stacked hay bales. The underground laboratory below was pristine, untouched by time. Glass chambers lined the walls, filled with specimens she couldn't identify. Her hands trembled as she found files bearing her grandmother's name alongside government seals marked Project Genesis. But Sarah wasn't just any ranch inheritor. As a former CDC researcher, she recognized the equipment immediately. This was cutting-edge genetic manipulation technology, decades ahead of anything publicly known. The dates on the files chilled her blood. They went back to her own birth. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "You found it. Now you're in danger. Trust no one." As her labor pains intensified and headlights appeared in the distance, Sarah realized she'd stumbled into something that powerful people had killed to protect. But what was her grandmother really doing down here, and why did every file contain Sarah's DNA profile? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The headlights grew brighter through the barn's warped wooden slats, casting dancing shadows across the hay-strewn floor. Sarah's breath came in sharp gasps as another contraction seized her, stronger than before. 8 months pregnant and alone in the middle of nowhere, this wasn't how she'd planned to spend her first visit to grandmother Elena's property. She'd driven up from Denver that morning to assess the ranch before putting it on the market. The inheritance had come as a shock. She barely remembered Elena, who'd vanished when Sarah was 7. Her mother had always changed the subject whenever Sarah asked about her grandmother's disappearance. Now, standing in this impossible underground facility, Sarah understood why. The elevator had descended 40 feet into solid rock. Lead panels provided sterile white light that hurt her eyes after the darkness above. The laboratory stretched the length of the barn, filled with equipment she recognized from her years studying infectious diseases at the CDC. Centrifuges, genetic sequencers, cryogenic storage units, all state-of-the-art, all completely illegal for private use. The specimens floating in the glass chambers made her stomach turn, not because they were grotesque, but because they were beautiful. Perfectly formed embryos suspended in fluid that shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence. Labels beneath each chamber bore clinical designations: Gen 7, Gen 12, Sarah 1. Sarah 1. Her hands shook as she photographed everything with her phone, though she doubted the images would survive if whoever was approaching had hostile intentions. The files told a story that rewrote everything she thought she knew about her family. Elena Martinez hadn't been the simple rancher Sarah's mother described. According to these documents, she'd been Dr. Elena Vasquez, a brilliant geneticist recruited by a black-budget government program in the 1980s. Project Genesis wasn't just about genetic manipulation, it was about creating enhanced humans, enhanced like Sarah herself, apparently. Every page contained references to her unusual cognitive abilities, her resistance to disease, her accelerated healing, things she'd always attributed to good genes and luck. The final report, dated 3 days before Elena's disappearance, contained a single chilling line: Subject S-1 has reached maturity. Recommend immediate termination of program and elimination of all evidence. Subject S1. Sarah's birth certificate was stapled to the back page. Another contraction hit, and she doubled over, gripping the metal examination table. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. The headlights above had stopped moving, and she could hear car doors slamming. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number, service tunnel behind the storage room. Go now. Sarah looked around frantically and spotted a door marked storage in the far corner. Every instinct told her to run, but the contractions were coming too fast. She could barely walk. let alone crawl through a tunnel. Footsteps echoed from the barn above, followed by voices. At least 3 people, maybe more. They weren't calling out or identifying themselves, which meant they weren't here to help. Elevator's been used recently, a man's voice carried down the shaft. Looks like we've got a visitor. Sarah pressed herself against the storage room door, fighting panic as another wave of pain crashed over her. The baby kicked violently, as if sensing her distress. She thought about the enhanced healing factor mentioned in the files, wondered if her child had inherited whatever modifications had been made to her genetics. The elevator hummed to life, carrying whoever was up there down to her level. Sarah took one last look at the laboratory that held the secrets of her existence, then opened the storage room door. The service tunnel beyond was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for her swollen body. She could hear the elevator doors opening behind her as she squeezed into the passage, praying she could reach the other end before her mysterious pursuers found the tunnel entrance. Behind her, footsteps entered the laboratory, and someone cursed in a language she didn't recognize. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown pasture as Sarah stepped onto the wraparound porch, coffee mug in hand. The baby had been particularly active during the night, making sleep nearly impossible. She pressed her free hand against her rounded belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement that still amazed her even at 6 months along. The ranch looked different in daylight, less ominous than it had during yesterday's storm, but no less mysterious. Weeds choked what had once been a vegetable garden, and the fence posts leaned at precarious angles. In the distance, the red barn stood like a weathered sentinel, its paint peeling and one door hanging askew. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her husband, David. "How's the ranch? Miss you already. Call tonight?" She typed back quickly. "It's interesting. Lots to process. Will call after I meet with the lawyer." The drive to town took 20 minutes on winding dirt roads that eventually gave way to cracked asphalt. Millbrook was the kind of place that seemed frozen in time, with a single main street lined by buildings that had seen better decades. Sarah parked in front of a narrow storefront with Henderson and Associates, legal services painted in fading gold letters on the window. James Henderson was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 40s, with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was cramped but organized, legal volumes stacked floor to ceiling. "I have to admit, Miss Chen, your grandmother was quite the enigma," he said, settling behind his desk. "Lived out there for 40 years, barely spoke to anyone in town. Very private woman." "Did you know her well?" Sarah asked, accepting the folder he offered. "Only through legal matters, property taxes, the occasional contract. She was always prompt, always paid in cash." Henderson paused. "I was surprised to learn she had family. She never mentioned you." Sarah felt a familiar pang. Her mother had cut ties with her own mother when Sarah was just a toddler, taking her away from Montana to start fresh in California. The reasons had always been vague. Irreconcilable differences was all her mother would say before changing the subject. "There's something else," Henderson continued, pulling out a manila envelope. "Your grandmother left specific instructions. This was to be given to you only after you'd spent at least one night on the property." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "I don't know. She sealed it herself and made me promise not to open it." He slid the envelope across the desk. "She also left this." He handed her an old brass key, heavy and ornate, unlike anything she'd seen around the ranch house. Back at the ranch, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope. Her grandmother's handwriting was precise, old-fashioned for Sarah, when you're ready to know the truth. Inside, she found a handwritten letter and another, smaller key. "My dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then I've finally found the courage to bridge the gap your mother created between us. Elizabeth had her reasons for leaving, though I've always believed she was wrong to keep you from the truth about our family. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to accept. Our family has been guardians of something important, something dangerous. For 3 generations we've protected secrets that others would kill for. The key I've left with Mr. Henderson opens the safe in my bedroom closet. Inside, you'll find documents that will help you understand. The smaller key opens something else entirely, something beneath the barn that represents both our family's greatest achievement and our deepest shame. Trust no one in Millbrook completely. There are those who know what lies beneath the surface, and they've been waiting for me to die so they can claim what isn't theirs. Be careful, my darling girl, and forgive an old woman for the burden I'm passing to you. With love and regret, Grandmother Rose. Sarah's hands trembled as she reread the letter. Secrets beneath the barn? Her practical mind wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of an isolated elderly woman, but something in her gut told her this was deadly serious. She found the safe exactly where the letter indicated, behind a false panel in the bedroom closet. Inside were manila folders filled with scientific documents, laboratory reports, and photographs that made no immediate sense. One folder was labeled Project Genesis, 1973 to 1987. Another contained correspondence with names she didn't recognize, discussing specimens and continuation protocols. As she drove toward the barn, Sarah noticed a black sedan parked on the road near her property line. It hadn't been there that morning. The car pulled away as she approached, but not before she glimpsed the driver, a man in a dark suit, watching her through sunglasses. The barn doors groaned as she pulled them open. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, filtering through gaps in the weathered boards. She walked slowly through the space, looking for anything that might correspond to the small brass key clutched in her palm. In the far corner, beneath a pile of old feed sacks, she found it. A trapdoor with a brass lock that matched her key perfectly. The basement door groaned as Sarah pulled it open, revealing wooden steps that disappeared into blackness below. The musty smell of earth and something else, something chemical and antiseptic, wafted up from the depths. She fumbled along the wall until her fingers found a light switch. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, illuminating a scene that made her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't a root cellar or storage basement. The space had been converted into something that looked like a medical facility from a science fiction movie. Stainless steel tables lined the walls, their surfaces scarred with age and use. Glass cabinets filled with vials and instruments caught the harsh light. In the center of the room, a large metal table dominated the space, complete with restraints and what appeared to be monitoring equipment. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly as she descended the stairs, each step echoing in the sterile chamber. The air grew colder as she moved deeper underground, and she noticed her breath beginning to mist slightly. Along one wall, filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels. Sarah approached them cautiously, as if they might spring to life. The first cabinet was locked, but the second drawer slid open with a metallic scrape that seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. Manila folders lined the drawer, each labeled with dates spanning from the 1970s to the early 1990s. Sarah pulled out a random file and opened it, immediately wishing she hadn't. The photographs were clinical but horrifying. They showed various animals, rabbits, cats, what looked like small primates, in different stages of what could only be described as mutation, limbs in wrong places, eyes that reflected an unnatural intelligence, bone structures that defied nature's blueprint. Each photo was meticulously labeled with dates, chemical compounds, and observation notes written in her grandmother's precise handwriting. Subject 47 billions shows increased cranial capacity but decreased motor function, one note read. Cognitive abilities appear enhanced, but subject displays aggressive tendencies toward handlers. Recommend termination and tissue analysis. Sarah's stomach lurched. She set the file aside and reached for another, this one from 1985. More photos, more notes, but these subjects looked different. Less animal, more something else. A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps on the barn floor, slow and deliberate. Sarah quickly closed the file and moved toward the stairs, but the footsteps had already stopped. She waited, listening to nothing but her own rapid heartbeat. Minutes passed before she convinced herself it had been her imagination, or perhaps the old building settling. She returned to the filing cabinets, this time selecting a folder from 1992, the year before her grandmother supposedly stopped her research work. This file was different. Instead of animal subjects, it contained what appeared to be genetic charts and DNA sequences. Names were listed alongside the scientific data, and Sarah's blood turned cold as she recognized several of them. The Patterson family from town, the Hendersons who used to run the gas station. Her own family name appeared multiple times, with detailed genealogical charts that went back several generations. At the bottom of the file, a handwritten note in her grandmother's spidery script, Project Lazarus Phase 3 complete. Bloodline integration successful in 73% of test subjects, moving to human trials, federal funding secured through DoD contacts. Note, keep family subjects isolated. Too much risk if they discover their genetic modifications before maturity. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into a nearby chair. Genetic modifications, family subjects. The implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. She thought about her own unusual health, how she'd always healed faster than other children, how she'd never gotten sick like her classmates, her mother's insistence on homeschooling, their family's isolation from the community. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress, or perhaps responding to something else entirely. She forced herself to stand and continued searching through the files. Near the back of the drawer, she found a folder labeled Termination Protocols with a date from just 2 years ago. Her grandmother had supposedly been suffering from dementia then, barely able to remember her own name, yet the handwriting in these documents was clear and steady. Security breach imminent, the top document read. Dr. Morrison asking too many questions. Recommend permanent solution before he can contact federal authorities. Other family members becoming suspicious. If project exposure occurs, implement total cleanup. No survivors. Dr. Morrison. Sarah remembered him vaguely. An older man who used to visit the ranch when she was very young. She hadn't thought about him in years, but now she recalled her mother's hushed conversations about his accident on the mountain road. Another sound from above, this time unmistakably footsteps. Sarah quickly gathered several files and stuffed them into her jacket. She moved toward the stairs, but stopped when she noticed something she'd missed before, a second door at the far end of the laboratory, partially hidden behind a bank of equipment. The footsteps above were moving toward the barn entrance now, definitely real, and getting closer. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah descended the metal stairs, each step echoing in the sterile space below. The laboratory stretched out before her like something from a fever dream. Pristine white walls lined with equipment she couldn't identify, glass containers filled with amber liquids, and filing cabinets that seemed to go on forever. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly as the baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. The air down here smelled wrong, too clean, like a hospital mixed with something chemical and sharp that made her nose burn. Marcus followed close behind, his breathing shallow. Jesus, Sarah, what the hell was your grandmother involved in? She couldn't answer because she didn't know. The grandmother she remembered from childhood visits had been a stern woman who raised chickens and grew vegetables, not someone who maintained a secret laboratory beneath her barn. Sarah approached the nearest workstation where papers were scattered across a metal desk. Her hands trembled as she picked up a document marked Project Genesis, Phase 3. The letterhead made her stomach drop. Helix Corporation, a name she vaguely recognized from news reports about pharmaceutical scandals. "Look at this," she whispered, scanning the dense scientific text. Words jumped out at her. Genetic modification, embryonic manipulation, enhanced human traits. The dates on the documents went back 25 years. Marcus was examining a wall of photographs, his face pale in the harsh light. "Sarah, you need to see this." She joined him, and her breath caught. The photos showed children, dozens of them, ranging from infants to teenagers. Each photo was labeled with numbers and letters instead of names. Some of the faces looked normal, but others displayed subtle abnormalities, eyes that were too large, fingers that were too long, skin with an almost translucent quality. "What did they do to these kids?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's gaze fell on a particular section of photos, and her blood turned to ice. In the corner of each image was a small notation, Blackwood subject line, her maiden name, her grandmother's name. She grabbed the nearest file cabinet and yanked it open. Inside were medical records, genetic profiles, and something that made her knees weak, birth certificates, real ones and falsified ones side by side. The real certificates showed children born to women listed as genetic subjects, while the false ones showed those same children adopted into regular families with new identities. "They were placing these children," she said, her voice cracking, "giving them to families who didn't know what they really were." Marcus pulled out another file, this one marked Subject B47. Inside was a photo of a young woman who looked remarkably like Sarah's mother. Attached to the photo was a genetic profile and a note in her grandmother's handwriting, "Successful integration." Subject unaware of modifications, proceeding to next-generation monitoring. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. "My mother," she breathed. "My mother was one of them. Which means—" Marcus started but couldn't finish the sentence. "Which means I might be too." Sarah's hand moved to her belly again. "And maybe the baby." A loud bang from upstairs made them both freeze. Then another, followed by the distinct sound of the barn door sliding open. Someone was up there. Marcus grabbed her arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." But there was nowhere to go. The laboratory had only one entrance, and it led directly up into the barn where someone was now moving around. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor above them, deliberate and searching. Sarah quickly stuffed several files into her purse while Marcus looked around frantically for another exit. In the far corner of the lab, behind a bank of computers, he found a small door marked Emergency Exit. "Here," he whispered. The door opened to reveal a narrow tunnel that seemed to extend beyond the barn's foundation. Emergency lighting illuminated a path that curved into darkness. Above them, the footsteps had stopped. Then, the sound of the hidden entrance being discovered, metal scraping against concrete as someone found the lever Sarah had accidentally triggered. "Go," Marcus urged, pushing her toward the tunnel. Sarah crawled into the narrow space, her pregnant belly making movement difficult. Behind her, she could hear Marcus gathering as many documents as he could carry. The sound of boots on the metal stairs echoed through the laboratory. "Where are they?" a gruff male voice called out. "I know someone's down here," another voice answered. This one colder, more clinical. "Search everything. If they've seen the files, we have a problem." Sarah's blood chilled as she recognized something familiar in the second voice, though she couldn't place where she'd heard it before. She crawled faster through the tunnel, Marcus right behind her, as the voices grew louder in the laboratory they'd just escaped. The tunnel seemed endless, and with each movement forward, one question echoed in her mind. If her family had been part of these experiments for generations, who could she trust to help her now? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah descended the narrow metal staircase, each step echoing in the confined space. The air grew colder with every foot deeper she went, carrying an antiseptic smell that reminded her of hospitals. Her phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness below, but she could make out the edges of what appeared to be a substantial underground room. When her feet finally touched solid ground, Sarah fumbled along the wall until she found a light switch. Banks of overhead fixtures flickered to life, revealing a sight that made her stomach lurch. The laboratory stretched out before her like something from a nightmare. Stainless steel tables lined the center of the room, their surfaces stained with substances she didn't want to identify. Glass cabinets filled with specimen jars caught the harsh light, their contents floating in murky preservative solutions. Along the far wall, a series of metal cages sat empty, their doors hanging open like hungry mouths. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly as she took her first tentative steps into the space. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. File cabinets lined one wall, their drawers slightly ajar, papers scattered on the floor as though someone had searched through them hastily. She approached the nearest table where a thick folder lay open. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. But these weren't recipes or ranch records. These were detailed notes about genetic modifications, breeding programs, and something called Project Genesis. "What were you doing down here, Grandma Rose?" Sarah whispered, turning the pages with trembling fingers. The first document made her blood run cold. It was a contract dated 30 years ago between Rose McKinnon and a company called Helix Dynamics. The terms outlined payment for research facilities and specimen housing in exchange for exclusive use of the underground laboratory. Sarah's eyes scanned the technical jargon until she found a paragraph that made her sink onto a nearby stool. Genetic enhancement protocols for livestock and potential human application trials. Human application trials. The words swam before her eyes as she tried to process their meaning. Her grandmother had been involved in human genetic experiments, but why? And more importantly, who else knew about this? Sarah forced herself to keep reading, though each page revealed more disturbing details. There were charts tracking birth rates, fertility improvements, and something called enhanced offspring characteristics. Photos showed cattle with unusual markings, sheep with abnormal wool growth, and horses with physiques that seemed almost too perfect. A loose photograph fluttered to the floor as she turned another page. Sarah bent to retrieve it and froze. The image showed a group of people in lab coats standing around this very room. She recognized her grandmother's face immediately, but younger, maybe in her 50s. Rose was smiling broadly, her arm around a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and cold eyes. On the back of the photo, someone had written, R. McKinnon, Dr. Marcus Webb, and team. Genesis, Phase 1 completion. 1994. The name Webb triggered a memory. Sarah had heard it recently, but where? She racked her brain until it came to her. The real estate agent had mentioned that someone named Webb had been asking about the ranch, claiming to be an old family friend. A sound from upstairs made Sarah's head snap up. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving across the barn floor above. She hadn't heard a car approach, which meant whoever it was had either parked far away or walked across the fields. Sarah's heart hammered as she quickly gathered the most important-looking documents and stuffed them into her jacket. The footsteps had stopped directly above the hidden entrance. She could hear muffled voices now, at least 2 people, maybe more. Moving as quietly as possible, she made her way to the opposite end of the laboratory, hoping there might be another exit. Behind a tall equipment rack, she discovered a second staircase leading to what appeared to be an outdoor storm shelter entrance. The metal door at the top was secured with a simple latch. The voices upstairs grew louder, and she heard the scrape of the hay bales being moved aside. They had found the entrance. Sarah climbed the stairs as quickly as her pregnant body would allow, pushed open the storm door, and emerged into the fading daylight behind a cluster of overgrown juniper trees. From her hiding spot, she could see 2 black SUVs parked near the house that definitely hadn't been there when she'd entered the barn. Through the barn's side window, she caught a glimpse of movement, figures in dark clothing descending into the laboratory she'd just escaped. Sarah pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. But before she could press call, a firm hand grabbed her shoulder. She spun around to find herself face to face with a man wearing wire-rimmed glasses and cold eyes that she recognized from the photograph. "Hello, Sarah," Dr. Marcus Webb said softly. "I think we need to talk." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah descended the metal stairs, each step echoing in the sterile chamber below. The underground laboratory stretched before her like something from a nightmare. Gleaming steel tables, glass cabinets filled with vials of unknown substances, and computer terminals that still glowed with active data streams. Her grandmother had been conducting experiments down here. But what kind? Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly as she approached the nearest workstation. Manila folders lay scattered across the surface, their contents spilling out in a chaos of medical charts, photographs, and handwritten notes. She picked up the first document, her blood running cold as she recognized the letterhead, Helix Genetics Corporation, Classified Research Division. The name triggered a memory from her college biology classes. Helix Genetics had been involved in groundbreaking gene therapy research 20 years ago until they'd abruptly shut down amid whispers of ethical violations and government investigations. Sarah flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. The documents detailed something called Project Genesis, a program focused on genetic enhancement and modification. But these weren't experiments on lab animals. The photographs showed human subjects, including children. One image made her stomach lurch. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, connected to monitoring equipment. Her eyes held a haunted quality that seemed to stare directly at Sarah through the photograph. In the margin, someone had written, Subject 47, Enhanced Cognitive Function Confirmed, Side Effects Minimal. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "What were you doing down here, Grandma Rose?" She moved to another table where computer monitors displayed complex genetic sequences. The screens showed active files, suggesting someone had been using this equipment recently. Sarah clicked through the directories, finding folders labeled with codes like Gen 1 through Gen 5 and inheritance protocols. One file caught her attention, bloodline tracking, Morrison family, her maiden name. Sarah opened it with shaking fingers. The screen filled with a detailed family tree going back 4 generations, but this wasn't any ordinary genealogical chart. Each name was accompanied by genetic markers, medical histories, and notations about enhancement compatibility. Her own name appeared at the bottom, along with a recent entry dated just 3 weeks ago, subject pregnant, monitor for trait manifestation. Someone had been watching her. Someone knew about her pregnancy before she'd even told her ex-husband. A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps on the barn floor, slow and deliberate. Sarah quickly closed the file and grabbed several folders from the table, stuffing them into her jacket. The footsteps moved toward the hidden entrance. She looked around frantically for another way out, but the laboratory appeared to have only one exit. The footsteps had stopped, and she could hear the mechanical whir of the entrance opening. Sarah ducked behind a large piece of equipment, what looked like a centrifuge the size of a washing machine, and held her breath. Heavy boots descended the metal stairs, their rhythm unhurried, confident. "I know you're down here, Sarah." The voice was male, unfamiliar, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "We've been monitoring the lab's security system. Motion sensors are quite useful that way." Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. The baby shifted inside her, as if sensing her distress. "Your grandmother was a brilliant scientist, you know. Revolutionary even. But she developed a conscience at the most inconvenient time." The footsteps moved closer, past the workstation where she'd found the files. Rose thought she could just walk away from 20 years of research, thought she could hide out here in the middle of nowhere and pretend the work didn't matter. Sarah pressed herself tighter against the equipment, trying to make herself invisible. Through a gap in the machinery, she caught a glimpse of polished black shoes and dark pants. "Genetics is destiny, Sarah. You can't run from your DNA, and your family's genetic markers are far too valuable to lose." The man paused directly in front of her hiding spot. "Especially now that you're carrying the next generation." The baby kicked hard, and Sarah bit her lip to keep from gasping. "The enhanced cognitive abilities have been successfully passed down through 3 generations of your family line. Your grandmother, your mother, and now you. But we never had the chance to study the effects on fetal development. Until now." Sarah's mind raced. Enhanced cognitive abilities? Her mother had been brilliant, earning a PhD in biochemistry before dying in what everyone believed was a car accident, and her grandmother had always been sharp as a tack, even in her 80s. "We're prepared to make you a very generous offer, Sarah. Continue the research willingly, and your child will have advantages beyond imagination. Refuse and, well, let's just say accidents happen. Just ask your mother. The words hit her like ice water. Her mother's death hadn't been an accident. The footsteps began moving away from her hiding spot, back toward the stairs. Think it over. We'll be in touch soon, very soon. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the digital files on Dr. Chen's tablet, each document more horrifying than the last. The underground laboratory hummed around her, its sterile fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over equipment she was only beginning to understand. Marcus stood guard by the hidden entrance, his jaw clenched as he processed what they'd discovered. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the ventilation system. She held up the tablet, showing Marcus a series of photographs. "These aren't just animal experiments. These are human embryos." Marcus moved closer, his face pale in the artificial light. The images showed various stages of embryonic development, but something was fundamentally wrong with each specimen. Extra appendages, malformed organs, genetic markers that didn't belong to any natural human variant. "Jesus," he breathed. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah swiped through more files, her stomach churning. According to these timestamps, at least 30 years, maybe longer. She paused on a document titled Project Genesis, Phase 3 Implementation. "Marcus, look at this date. This file was created the year I was born." The implications hit them both simultaneously. Sarah sank into the nearest chair, her free hand instinctively moving to her pregnant belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress, and she felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said urgently. "Now?" But Sarah was transfixed by another file that had caught her attention. Her own name appeared in the document header, along with a series of genetic sequences and medical notations. "I can't leave yet. This file, it's about me." She opened it with shaking fingers. The document contained detailed genetic analysis, blood work results she'd never authorized, and fertility projections that made her skin crawl. Someone had been monitoring her biological functions for years without her knowledge. "How is this possible?" she murmured, reading through test results that dated back to her childhood. "These blood samples. I remember getting blood drawn at routine checkups, but I never thought—" Marcus peered over her shoulder. "Your grandmother arranged for all your medical care, right? After your parents died?" "Yes, but she lived thousands of miles away. She just paid for everything through her attorney." The pieces were clicking into place with sickening clarity. She wasn't just being generous, she was collecting data. A soft beeping sound from across the laboratory made them both freeze. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the exit, but she resisted. "Wait, there's more. Look at this." She'd found another folder labeled Genetic Inheritance Patterns, Third Generation Viability. Inside were files on dozens of other women, all around Sarah's age, all with similar genetic markers. "I'm not the only one. There are others." The beeping grew more insistent and red lights began flashing along the walls. Marcus didn't wait for Sarah's cooperation this time. He physically lifted her from the chair and headed for the ladder leading back to the barn. "We can take the tablet," he said firmly. "But we're leaving now." They climbed quickly, Sarah clutching the device against her chest. As they emerged into the barn, the familiar scent of hay and horses seemed foreign after the antiseptic smell below. Marcus immediately began moving hay bales to conceal the entrance, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Someone's coming," she whispered, hearing the crunch of gravel from the driveway. Through the barn's dusty windows, they could see headlights approaching the house. Not one vehicle, but 3 dark SUVs moving in formation. These weren't casual visitors, they moved with military precision. Marcus finished concealing the entrance and guided Sarah toward the barn's rear exit. "There's a trail through the woods that leads to the old mining road. We can circle back to my truck." They slipped out into the cool night air just as the SUVs stopped in front of the house. Sarah could hear car doors slamming, voices giving quiet orders, professional, organized, dangerous. Moving as quickly as Sarah's pregnancy would allow, They made their way into the tree line. Behind them, flashlight beams began sweeping the property. It wouldn't take long for whoever was searching to check the barn. "Who are they?" Sarah gasped, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground. "People who don't want that laboratory exposed," Marcus replied grimly. "The question is how they knew we were here." As if in answer to his question, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the message was clear: "Stop digging or your baby pays the price." Sarah's blood ran cold. Not only did they know about her investigation, they knew about her pregnancy. They'd been watching her, probably since she'd arrived at the ranch, maybe longer. The sound of barking dogs echoed across the property. Their pursuers weren't just professional, they were prepared for a hunt. The basement door slammed shut above them, with a finality that made Sarah's blood run cold. She heard the distinct click of a lock engaging, followed by heavy footsteps moving across the barn floor overhead. "Well, that's not good," Marcus muttered, already bounding up the concrete steps. He pushed against the door with his shoulder, then rattled the handle. Nothing. Definitely locked. Sarah remained frozen at the bottom of the stairs, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her rising panic. Who was that? How did they know we were here? "Someone who's been watching the place." Marcus descended the steps, his expression grim. "The question is whether they're coming back or if they're planning to leave us down here." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh glow across the laboratory. Sarah looked around at the equipment, the files, the evidence of decades of secret experiments, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. "My grandmother's journal," she said suddenly, remembering the leather-bound book she'd been clutching when they heard the footsteps. "It might explain what's really going on here." She found it where she'd dropped it near the filing cabinets and opened to where she'd left off reading. Margaret's careful handwriting filled page after page, growing more frantic as the entries progressed. "Listen to this," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the confined space. "The children born from the enhanced embryos are developing abilities beyond our projections: enhanced cognitive function, accelerated healing, increased sensory perception. But there are side effects we didn't anticipate. Some subjects exhibit aggressive behaviors, others show signs of cellular instability. We're playing with forces we don't fully understand." Marcus had moved to examine the locked specimens more closely. "What year was that entry?" Sarah flipped back a few pages. 1987, the year before my mother left home. She continued reading, her voice growing quieter. "Richard wants to expand the program, but I've seen enough. The government funding comes with too many strings attached. They want weapons, not scientific advancement. I've decided to shut down the project, but I fear it may already be too late." "Too late for what?" "Some of the enhanced subjects have already been born. Their parents have no idea what their children really are. We've created a generation of unknowns, and now we've lost track of them." Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the page. "Including my own granddaughter." The words hit her like a physical blow. Marcus looked up sharply from the specimen he'd been examining. "Sarah, it's talking about me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "My mother was part of this. I'm one of the enhanced subjects." She sank onto a nearby stool, the journal falling open in her lap. "That's why she ran away. That's why she never talked about her family." Marcus crossed to her, his face serious. "That could explain some things. Your ability to notice details others miss, the way you seem to sense things before they happen." "And the baby," Sarah said, her hand moving protectively to her stomach. "If I'm genetically modified, what does that mean for my child?" A loud bang from upstairs interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Then another. Someone was moving heavy objects around in the barn above them. Marcus climbed the stairs again and pressed his ear to the door. "I can hear machinery starting up. Sounds like a truck or tractor. Are they trying to bury us in here?" "I don't think so. The entrance is too well hidden for that. But they might be planning something else." He came back down, scanning the room. "There has to be another way out. Underground facilities like this always have emergency exits. They began searching methodically, checking behind equipment and along the walls for hidden panels or doors. Sarah found herself drawn back to her grandmother's journal, desperate for answers. "Marcus, here's something else. The Helix Corporation has threatened to take over the project entirely if we don't deliver results. They claim ownership of all research and subjects. I've hidden the most sensitive files, but I fear they'll never stop looking. The children we've created are too valuable to them." Helix Corporation? Marcus paused his search. That name sounds familiar. They've already sent agents to monitor some of the enhanced individuals. They're building profiles, waiting for the right moment to make contact. God help us all for what we've unleashed. A new sound from above made them both freeze. The engine noise had stopped, but now they could hear voices. Multiple people moving around the barn, their footsteps deliberate and coordinated. "They're not here to chat," Marcus said grimly. Sarah closed the journal and tucked it into her jacket. Whatever was about to happen, she needed to protect the evidence of her family's secrets. More importantly, she needed to protect her unborn child from whatever these people wanted. The voices above grew louder, and she caught fragments of conversation that chilled her to the bone. Words like containment, asset recovery, and eliminate witnesses. Time was running out, and they were trapped 30 feet underground with nowhere to run. The metal stairs descended into absolute darkness, each step echoing with a hollow ring that seemed to mock Sarah's racing heartbeat. She gripped the cold handrail with one hand, while her other clutched the flashlight, its beam cutting through the suffocating blackness below. The air grew colder with each step, carrying an antiseptic smell that reminded her of hospitals and morgues. Behind her, Marcus's breathing was steady but strained. Neither of them had spoken since discovering the hidden entrance beneath the barn's false floor. The silence felt necessary, as if words might somehow make the nightmare they were descending into more real. The staircase ended at a heavy door marked with a biohazard symbol, its yellow paint faded but still unmistakably ominous. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the handle, and she felt the baby shift restlessly inside her, as if sensing her fear. "We don't have to do this now," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah shook her head. "Someone killed Detective Rivera because of what's down here. I need to know what my grandmother was involved in." The door opened with surprising ease, revealing a corridor lined with fluorescent lights that flickered to life automatically. The laboratory stretched ahead of them, a sterile maze of white walls and gleaming equipment that looked decades ahead of anything Sarah had ever seen. Glass cases lined the walls, most empty, but some containing specimens that made her stomach lurch. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed, moving to examine a tank filled with cloudy fluid. "Sarah, look at this." She approached reluctantly, her flashlight beam joining the overhead lights to illuminate the contents. Floating in the preservative was what looked like a human fetus, but something was wrong with its proportions. The head was too large, the limbs too long, and there were structures that didn't belong on any human Sarah had ever seen. A clipboard hung beside the tank, filled with notes in her grandmother's spidery handwriting. Sarah forced herself to read. Subject 47C, genomic modification successful through third trimester. Enhanced cognitive development evident. Physical abnormalities within acceptable parameters for trial phase. Trial phase of what? Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke. Marcus had moved deeper into the laboratory, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. "Sarah, you need to see this." She found him standing before a wall of filing cabinets, their drawers pulled open to reveal hundreds of folders. Each was labeled with a number and date, spanning over 30 years. Marcus held one open, his face pale in the artificial light. "These are medical records," he said, "but not just any records. Look at the names." Sarah peered over his shoulder and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The folder contained detailed genetic profiles, medical histories, and pregnancy records for dozens of women from the surrounding counties. Women who had come to her grandmother for help with difficult pregnancies, fertility issues, or prenatal care. women who had trusted Dr. Eleanor Whitmore with their most precious hopes. She was experimenting on them, Sarah whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. All those women who came here for help, she was using them as test subjects. Marcus pulled out another file, then another. The scope of the operation became clear as they read. For over 3 decades, Eleanor had been conducting unauthorized genetic experiments on unborn children, using her reputation as a country doctor to gain access to vulnerable pregnant women. The modifications ranged from attempts to enhance intelligence and physical abilities to more disturbing trials involving animal DNA integration. The funding, Marcus said, pointing to financial records tucked into one of the folders. Look where the money was coming from. The letterhead made Sarah's blood run cold. Blackwood Pharmaceutical Corporation. Millions of dollars had been funneled to Eleanor's operation over the years, with detailed reports sent back to corporate headquarters documenting the results of each trial. They're still operating, Sarah realized, her hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. Blackwood Pharmaceutical is still in business. They probably have other operations like this. A sound from above made them both freeze. Footsteps were moving across the barn floor, slow and deliberate. Someone was searching for the entrance they had found. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm. Is there another way out? They moved quickly through the laboratory, passing more horrors that Sarah tried not to see. At the far end, they found a second corridor, leading to what looked like living quarters. Eleanor had clearly spent significant time down here, away from prying eyes, conducting her unholy work. The footsteps above grew louder, more urgent. Whoever was up there had found the hidden entrance. Here, Marcus whispered, pointing to an emergency exit barely visible behind a bank of equipment. The sign above it was barely legible, but it clearly marked an escape route. As they reached the exit, Sarah heard the metal stairs creaking under someone's weight. Their pursuer had found the laboratory. In moments, they would discover that Sarah and Marcus had been here, that the secrets Eleanor had died protecting were finally coming to light. The basement laboratory felt different in the morning light filtering down through the barn slats above. What had seemed like a nightmare just hours before now appeared stark and undeniably real. Sarah moved carefully between the metal tables, her pregnancy making her movements deliberate as she photographed everything with her phone. Marcus stood guard at the entrance, while Elena sorted through files with practiced efficiency. The older woman's hands moved with surprising steadiness for someone who'd just revealed decades of buried secrets. Your grandmother wasn't the monster in this story, Elena said, holding up a folder marked with red warning labels. She was trying to stop it. These documents prove the real scope of what Helix Corporation was doing here. Sarah paused her documentation to look at the papers Elena held. The letterhead bore the name of a company she'd never heard of, but the signatures at the bottom made her blood run cold. Government officials, medical researchers, and, at the very bottom, a name that made everything click into place. Dr. James Morrison. Morrison, she whispered. That's the man who's been calling me, the one who claimed to know my family. Elena's face darkened. Morrison was the lead researcher. He's the reason your mother ran, why your grandmother spent 30 years living in fear. He's the one who turned genetic research into something monstrous. The sound of Marcus clearing his throat drew their attention. We've got company, he called down softly. Black sedan just pulled up the drive. Government plates. Sarah felt her baby shift restlessly, as if sensing her spike of adrenaline. There's another way out, she said, remembering the second tunnel she'd glimpsed during her first terrified exploration. Elena, grab whatever documentation you can carry. They moved quickly through the laboratory, Elena stuffing files into a canvas bag while Sarah continued photographing. The second tunnel was narrower than the main entrance, clearly designed as an emergency exit. Cobwebs clung to the wooden support beams, and the air grew thicker as they descended. Above them, they could hear footsteps in the barn, then voices calling Sarah's name. Not the friendly greeting of neighbors, but the authoritative tone of people who expected to be obeyed. Miss Chen, we know you're here. We just want to talk. Elena snorted quietly. That's what they told your grandmother right before they tried to have her committed. The tunnel emerged behind a grove of cottonwood trees, nearly a quarter-mile from the main house. Sarah's pickup truck was parked there, exactly where Marcus had suggested they leave it as a precaution. They climbed out into the filtered sunlight, Elena moving with surprising agility for her age. "Now what?" Marcus asked, brushing dirt from his jacket. "They'll search the house, find the laboratory entrance eventually." Sarah looked back toward the ranch buildings, where she could see figures moving purposefully around her barn. Her sanctuary, the place where she'd hoped to build a new life for her child, was being invaded by people who saw her family's history as something to be controlled or eliminated. "We go public," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Elena, you said my grandmother kept evidence of what really happened here. Morrison and whoever he's working with now, they've stayed hidden because the victims stayed silent. My mother ran instead of fighting. My grandmother hid instead of exposing them." Elena studied her with those sharp eyes. "Going public means painting a target on your back, on your baby's back. These people have government connections, unlimited resources." "They already have a target on us," Sarah replied. "The only difference is whether we fight back or spend the rest of our lives running." Marcus was scrolling through his phone. "I've got contacts at 3 different newspapers, plus an investigative journalist who specializes in government cover-ups. If we're doing this, we need to do it right. Multiple sources, simultaneous release, everything documented." Sarah felt the baby kick, a strong movement that seemed almost like agreement. What about the other families? The files mentioned other subjects, other children born from the experiments. "Some are dead," Elena said quietly. "Others disappeared like your mother did. But there are a few who might be willing to speak up if they knew they weren't alone." The sound of engines starting up at the ranch house reached them through the trees. Sarah watched as the black sedan began moving down the drive, followed by 2 unmarked vans she hadn't noticed before. "They're leaving," Marcus observed. "But they'll be back." "Then we'd better work fast," Sarah said. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the steady movement of her child. This baby would grow up knowing the truth about their family, would inherit a legacy of courage instead of fear. Elena squeezed her shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said someday the right person would come along to finish what she started." As they climbed into the pickup truck, Sarah took one last look at the ranch that had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. Soon, the whole world would know what had happened here. The rain had stopped by the time Maya reached the edge of town, but the clouds hung low and threatening overhead. She parked behind the old Sinclair gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly in the gathering dusk. Through her rearview mirror, she watched the empty road for several minutes before satisfied no one had followed her. Dr. Chen's contact had been specific about the meeting location, the abandoned grain elevator on the outskirts of Millfield. Maya's hands trembled as she started the engine again, her baby stirring restlessly as if sensing her anxiety. She placed a protective hand over her belly, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even to her own ears. The grain elevator loomed against the darkening sky like a concrete monument to forgotten industry. Maya pulled into the weed-choked parking lot, her headlights sweeping across broken windows and rusted machinery. A single car waited in the shadows, a silver sedan with government plates that made her stomach clench. A woman emerged from the sedan, tall and lean with prematurely grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a dark suit that seemed to absorb what little light remained in the sky. As Maya approached, the woman's hand moved to her jacket, and Maya glimpsed the outline of a holstered weapon. "Miss Torres," the woman said, her voice crisp with authority. "Agent Sarah Kellerman, CDC Special Investigations Unit. Dr. Chen said you have information about Project Helix." Maya's breath caught. "You know about Helix?" "We've been tracking the project for 3 years, Kellerman replied, her eyes scanning the surrounding area with practiced vigilance. "Your grandmother's research was supposed to have been destroyed in 1987, but we've had reports of genetic anomalies in this region that suggest otherwise." The weight of the flash drive in Maya's pocket felt like a lead brick. What kind of anomalies? Livestock born with impossible genetic combinations, crops that shouldn't be able to survive in this climate. And now, Kellerman's gaze dropped to Maya's pregnant belly. Dr. Chen mentioned your condition might be connected. Maya wrapped her arms around herself protectively. What do you mean? Your grandmother's final reports mentioned something called the Genesis Protocol, an attempt to create genetic modifications that could be passed to subsequent generations. We believed all test subjects had been eliminated, but if you're carrying those modifications, you think my baby is some kind of experiment? Maya's voice rose with panic and rage. I think your baby might be in more danger than you realize, Kellerman said grimly. The people who funded Project Helix didn't just walk away when it was shut down. They've been waiting, watching for any sign that Evelyn's work survived. A chill ran down Maya's spine as she remembered the black SUV, the break-in at her apartment, the sense of being watched. How long have they known about me? Probably since you inherited the ranch. Property transfers are public record, and they've had systems in place to monitor any activity related to former test sites. Kellerman pulled out a tablet, showing Maya a satellite image of the ranch. We detected unusual electromagnetic signatures from the underground facility 2 weeks ago. Someone's been accessing it regularly. Maya's blood turned to ice. Marcus, my boyfriend, he's been helping me explore the lab, but he's the one who suggested we contact Dr. Chen. He can't be involved. Kellerman's expression grew troubled. Marcus Vance? What do you know about his background? He's a freelance journalist. He came to town to write about rural communities, and we met at the diner. Maya's words trailed off as doubt crept in. Had their meeting really been coincidence? How had he known so much about genetic research? Why had he been so eager to explore the lab? Miss Torres, I need you to listen carefully. Marcus Vance died in a car accident in Denver 3 months ago. Whoever you've been with has been using his identity. The world seemed to tilt beneath Maya's feet. She stumbled backward, her hand finding the hood of her car for support. That's impossible. I've been living with him. He's been taking care of me, protecting me. He's been monitoring you, Kellerman cut her off. Gaining your trust, accessing the lab, probably transmitting everything back to his handlers. Do you have the research data with you? Maya's hand moved instinctively to the flash drive, but she hesitated. If she couldn't trust Marcus, could she trust this woman either? Agent or not, Kellerman represented the same government that had allowed Project Helix to exist in the first place. I need proof, Maya said. About Marcus, about everything. Kellerman nodded grimly and pulled out her phone, showing Maya a news article with a photo. The face was unmistakably Marcus, but the headline read, Local journalist dies in highway crash. The article was dated 3 months ago, 2 weeks before Maya had met the man claiming to be Marcus Vance. Her legs gave out, and she sank against her car as the full scope of the deception crashed over her. We need to get you to safety, Kellerman said, reaching out to help her up. And we need that data before they realize you've discovered the truth. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah descended into the laboratory, her footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. 3 days had passed since she'd discovered the hidden entrance beneath the barn, and each visit revealed new horrors that made her stomach churn. Tonight, she carried a heavy-duty flashlight and wore gloves. She'd learned from her previous mistakes. The baby kicked restlessly as she moved deeper into the facility, as if sensing her mounting anxiety. She paused at the first row of filing cabinets, pulling out folders with methodical determination. The documents inside painted a picture of her grandmother's involvement that grew more disturbing with each page. Subject 47, genetic modification successful. Enhanced cognitive function observed in offspring. Subject 52, termination required due to uncontrolled mutations. Sarah's hands trembled as she photographed each document with her phone. The clinical language couldn't disguise what these records described, decades of human experimentation, with her grandmother Eleanor as the lead researcher. The dates stretched back to the 1960s, long before Sarah's mother was born. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the barn floor above her head. Sarah clicked off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. She'd been careful to park her truck behind the equipment shed, out of sight from the main road. No one should know she was here. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Sarah held her breath, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. The silence stretched until she began to wonder if she'd imagined the sound. Then came the scrape of metal on concrete. Someone was moving the hay bales that concealed the entrance. She needed another way out. Sarah crept deeper into the laboratory, past the specimen jars and dormant equipment, searching for an emergency exit. The facility was larger than she'd initially realized, with corridors branching off in multiple directions. Her grandmother had built an underground empire of secrets beneath the innocent facade of a cattle ranch. Light spilled down the entrance shaft, followed by the beam of a powerful flashlight. Sarah ducked behind a bank of computers, grateful they were still large enough to provide decent cover. The intruder's footsteps were careful, measured. This wasn't someone stumbling around in the dark. "I know you're down here, Sarah." The voice was male, unfamiliar, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "There's no point hiding. We need to talk." Sarah's grip tightened on her phone. Should she call 911? But what would she tell them? That someone had broken into an illegal laboratory that her dead grandmother had operated for decades? The police would have questions she wasn't prepared to answer. "Your grandmother was a brilliant woman," the voice continued, growing closer. "But she made promises she couldn't keep. Now those promises fall to you." Sarah edged along the wall, moving toward what looked like another corridor. The baby's movements had intensified, responding to her elevated stress. She forced herself to breathe slowly, trying to stay calm for both their sakes. "The research down here, it's bigger than you understand. Eleanor wasn't working alone. There are people who've invested considerable resources in these experiments, and they expect returns on their investment." A filing cabinet drawer slammed shut nearby. He was searching the same documents she'd been photographing, probably trying to determine how much she'd learned. Sarah reached the corridor and peered around the corner. It led to what appeared to be a storage area, lined with freezers and refrigeration units. Most were dark, unpowered, but a few still hummed with electricity. Someone had been maintaining parts of this facility even after her grandmother's death. "The baby you're carrying," the voice called out, and Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Eleanor's records indicate some interesting genetic markers in your family line. That child represents the culmination of 3 generations of careful breeding." The words hit her like a physical blow. Careful breeding. Her marriage to David, her pregnancy. Had any of it been her choice, or had she been guided towards specific outcomes by forces she'd never suspected? She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking as she tried to dial David's number. The call went straight to voicemail. Where was he tonight? He'd said something about working late, but now she couldn't remember the details. "Sarah, this can be simple or complicated," the intruder continued. "But either way, you're coming with me tonight. There are people who need to meet you, to discuss your future and the future of your child." The storage room had no obvious exits, but Sarah noticed a ventilation grate near the ceiling. Too small for her to fit through, especially pregnant. She was trapped, with nowhere to run and no way to call for help. The footsteps were getting closer. Sarah clutched her phone, scrolling frantically through her contacts. Marcus Chen, the attorney who'd handled her grandmother's estate. She pressed call, praying he'd answer despite the late hour. "Please," she whispered when his voicemail greeting began. "It's Sarah Whitmore. I'm at the ranch and someone's here. The laboratory under the barn. Send help." The storm had passed, leaving the ranch eerily quiet except for the steady drip of water from the barn's gutters. Maya pressed herself against the laboratory wall, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance above. Dr. Chen's hand found her shoulder, his grip tight with shared fear. "They found us," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the remaining equipment. Maya's mind raced through their options. The main entrance was compromised, but during their frantic search through the files, she'd noticed ventilation shafts and what appeared to be another passage leading deeper into the underground complex. Her grandmother had been thorough in her paranoia, creating multiple escape routes. "This way," she mouthed, pointing toward a narrow corridor they hadn't fully explored. The voices above grew closer, accompanied by the scrape of boots on metal rungs. Maya recognized one voice immediately, Thomas Blackwood's authoritative tone cutting through the darkness. But there were others, at least 3 distinct speakers planning their descent. Dr. Chen grabbed the most crucial files, while Maya snatched her grandmother's journal. They moved as quietly as possible through the secondary passage, their phones providing minimal light. The corridor was cramped, clearly designed for emergencies rather than comfort. Behind them, powerful flashlight beams began to sweep the main laboratory. Maya heard Blackwood's frustrated curse as he surveyed the scattered papers and open file cabinets. They'd left obvious signs of their presence, making stealth impossible now. "Sir, they can't have gone far," a younger voice reported. "Fresh footprints in the dust, and some files are missing." "Find them," Blackwood commanded. "Maya Reeves knows too much, and the doctor is a loose end we should have tied up years ago." The narrow passage opened into another room, smaller than the main lab but equally disturbing. Glass containers lined the walls, some still filled with preservative fluids that caught their phone lights like captured stars. Maya's stomach lurched as she recognized what floated inside. Tissue samples, some clearly human. Dr. Chen stopped beside a particular container, his face pale in the artificial light. "Neural tissue," he said quietly. They were trying to map consciousness itself, to understand how memories form and can be altered. "Altered how?" Maya asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be terrible. "Memory implantation. False recollections." They wanted to create the perfect subjects, people who would remember things that never happened, forget things that did. His voice carried the weight of old guilt. "I helped design the initial protocols before I understood what they really intended." The sound of their pursuers grew closer, echoing through the passage they'd just traversed. Maya spotted another exit, this one leading upward through what appeared to be a natural cave formation. Her grandmother had built the laboratory within an existing cave system, using the earth itself as camouflage. They climbed, Dr. Chen struggling with the files while Maya fought against her growing exhaustion. The baby seemed to sense her stress, shifting restlessly as adrenaline flooded her system. Each step required careful placement on the rough stone, and more than once loose rocks clattered down behind them. "Maya!" Blackwood's voice boomed through the laboratory below. "You're carrying precious cargo. Don't risk your child's life for information you don't understand." His words stopped her cold. The emphasis on precious cargo sent chills down her spine. They weren't just trying to protect old secrets. They wanted her baby. Dr. Chen noticed her hesitation. "Keep moving," he urged. "Whatever he's implying, we can't let them catch us." The cave passage twisted upward, and Maya began to feel air movement suggesting an external opening. Behind them, flashlight beams began probing the entrance to their escape route. Blackwood had found their trail. The genetic modifications weren't random, Dr. Chen continued quietly as they climbed. They were building toward something specific. Each generation was supposed to carry enhanced traits forward, creating bloodlines with particular capabilities. Maya's free hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "You're saying my baby is the culmination of decades of selective breeding and genetic manipulation," he finished grimly. "That's why they're so desperate to find you. Your child represents the success of their entire program." The cave opening appeared ahead, partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. Maya could see grey daylight filtering through the leaves, promising escape. But as they neared the exit, she heard vehicles arriving outside, car doors slamming, voices coordinating a search pattern. They were surrounded. Dr. Chen pressed the files into her hands. "There's a remote cabin about 2 miles northeast," he whispered. "Your grandmother mentioned it in her notes. A final safe house she prepared. Take these and run." "What about you?" I'll buy you time. His expression was resolute. This is my fault, my responsibility. Your baby deserves a chance at a normal life. Before Maya could protest, he was moving back down the passage, calling out to their pursuers, drawing their attention away from her location. She clutched the files and journal, took a deep breath, and pushed through the vegetation into the uncertain safety of the storm-washed morning. The safe house felt more like a prison with each passing hour. Sarah paced the small living room, her hand unconsciously resting on her growing belly as she tried to process everything Dr. Martinez had revealed. The baby kicked, and she wondered what genetic legacy she was passing on, what hidden markers lay dormant in their shared DNA. Detective Morgan sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed tones with someone from the FBI. The federal agents had arrived that morning, their black SUVs creating an ominous presence outside the modest ranch house 20 miles from her grandmother's property. "We can't wait much longer," Agent Chen said, reviewing the files spread across the coffee table. "Every hour we delay gives them more time to destroy evidence or disappear completely." Sarah stopped pacing. "You still haven't told me who them is exactly. You keep saying this conspiracy goes deeper than my grandmother's lab, but I need names." Agent Chen exchanged a look with her partner, Agent Reynolds. "The company that funded your grandmother's research was called Helix Dynamics. Officially, they were dissolved 15 years ago after an FDA investigation. Unofficially, they've been operating through shell companies and private investors, including the pharmaceutical giant Meridian Corp," Reynolds added, his voice grim. "We believe your grandmother discovered something they wanted buried, literally and figuratively." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. The break-in at my apartment in Seattle. They were looking for something specific, weren't they? Something they thought I inherited besides the ranch. "Your grandmother's research notes," Chen confirmed. According to Dr. Martinez, she kept detailed records of everything, not just the genetic modifications she was performing, but the identities of the children involved and the families who participated. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Children? You mean there were others like me?" "We believe so. The lab was operational for over 2 decades. If our estimates are correct, there could be dozens of test subjects, most of whom probably have no idea what was done to them." Detective Morgan ended his call and joined them. That was the medical examiner. "Frank Coleman didn't die from his injuries in the barn collapse. He was poisoned, something called succinylcholine. It's a paralytic agent that's nearly impossible to detect unless you know what to look for." "A professional hit," Reynolds muttered. "They're cleaning house." Sarah sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. So Frank knew about the lab all along. He was probably helping my grandmother, and when I showed up asking questions, "You painted a target on his back," Chen finished. "I'm sorry, but that's likely what happened." The baby kicked harder, as if sensing her distress. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to center herself. What exactly did my grandmother discover that was worth killing for? Dr. Martinez, who had been quietly reviewing his old files, looked up with haunted eyes. "She found evidence that the genetic modifications were still being tested, not just in lab animals, but in human subjects. Children in foster care, kids from broken homes who wouldn't be missed if something went wrong." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an old clock on the mantel. "The modifications we were working on weren't just about enhancing intelligence or physical capabilities," he continued. "In the wrong hands, they could be weaponized. Imagine creating people who are immune to certain biological agents while being carriers for diseases that only affect specific genetic markers." Sarah felt sick. "Biological warfare, or targeted genocide," Reynolds said quietly. "We think your grandmother tried to blow the whistle 15 years ago, which is why she went into hiding. But she kept evidence, insurance, in case they came for her. And now they think I have it," Sarah whispered. Morgan's phone buzzed with a text message. His face went pale as he read it. "We need to move, now. Local police just found Dr. Martinez's house burned to the ground. If they've escalated to arson, The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Sarah heard the distinct sound of vehicles approaching fast, their engines cutting through the night air. Chen was already moving, weapon drawn, motioning for everyone to get down. "Back door," Reynolds hissed, but before anyone could move, the front windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and smoke canisters. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't see. Strong hands grabbed her arms, pulling her toward what she hoped was safety. But in the chaos and smoke, she couldn't tell if it was Morgan or one of the agents. The baby kicked frantically as chemical smoke burned her lungs. Gunshots erupted from multiple directions. Someone screamed, she couldn't tell who. Then she was outside, cold night air hitting her face, but still being dragged by unseen hands. "Sarah!" Morgan's voice, distant and desperate, calling her name. But she was already being shoved into a vehicle, the door slamming shut as the engine roared to life. Through the rear window, she watched the safe house disappear into the darkness, along with any illusion that she could escape her grandmother's legacy. The nightmare was just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Sarah pressed her back against the barn wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the gaps in the weathered wood, she could see Marcus pacing near his black SUV, phone pressed to his ear. His voice carried on the wind, urgent and threatening. "She knows too much now. We can't contain this anymore." A pause. "I don't care what the board says. 30 years of research isn't worth exposure." Sarah's blood ran cold. She pressed her palm against her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her, as if sensing her fear. The files she'd discovered in the underground lab painted a horrifying picture: generations of illegal human trials, genetic manipulation, and her own family's unwilling participation as test subjects. Her grandmother hadn't been a willing collaborator. She'd been a victim. The phone call ended, and Marcus's footsteps crunched across the gravel. Sarah held her breath as he approached the barn, his shadow falling across the entrance. She gripped the USB drive containing all the evidence, knowing it was her only leverage now. "Sarah, I know you're in there," Marcus called out, his voice deceptively calm. "Let's talk about this rationally. There's no need for anyone to get hurt." She remained silent, edging deeper into the barn's shadows. The entrance to the hidden lab yawned open behind her like a mouth, the metal stairs descending into darkness. She'd destroyed most of the equipment down there, but the files on the USB were enough to expose everything. "Your grandmother understood the importance of our work," Marcus continued, his footsteps echoing as he entered the barn. "She knew the greater good sometimes requires sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" Sarah finally spoke, unable to contain her rage. "You experimented on pregnant women, on their unborn children. You call that the greater good?" Marcus appeared around the corner, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture, but Sarah noticed the slight bulge beneath his jacket. Armed. She should have expected as much. "The genetic modifications we developed have saved thousands of lives," he said. "Your own enhanced immune system, your resistance to certain diseases. You've benefited from our research your entire life." "Without my consent," Sarah backed toward the lab entrance. "And now you want to do the same to my baby." A cold smile played at Marcus's lips. "The child carries unique genetic markers. With the right modifications, we could eliminate hereditary diseases entirely. Imagine a world without genetic disorders, without choice," Sarah finished. "You're playing God with people's lives." She descended the first few steps into the lab, keeping Marcus in sight. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating the destroyed equipment and scattered papers. Her handiwork from the night before looked even more devastating in the harsh light. Marcus followed, his expression darkening as he surveyed the damage. "You have no idea what you've done. Decades of research gone." "Good." Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs, her hand finding the emergency alarm she'd noticed earlier. One pull would alert the authorities, but she needed to get Marcus's confession first. "Tell me about the others. How many families did you destroy?" "We saved them," Marcus insisted, his composure cracking. "The genetic defects, the hereditary diseases, we eliminated them before they could cause suffering. By killing the mothers who refused to participate." Marcus's face went white. That was never supposed to happen. Some of the early trials had complications. Sarah's finger hovered over the alarm. "Like my mother?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truth. Marcus's hand moved toward his jacket, and Sarah knew she was out of time. "Your mother was weak," he said finally. "She threatened to expose everything after your birth. She didn't understand the significance of what we'd accomplished." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mother hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered for trying to protect her daughter. "And now you're going to kill me too?" Sarah's voice was steady despite her fear. "I'm going to give you a choice," Marcus replied, drawing a pistol from his jacket. "Come with me willingly, let us complete our work with your child, and you'll both survive. Refuse, and I'll be forced to take more drastic measures." Sarah pulled the emergency alarm. The shrill sound echoed through the underground chamber, and Marcus lunged forward. Sarah threw herself behind an overturned table as the first shot rang out, splinters exploding around her. She clutched the USB drive, her only proof of the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. Above them, she could hear engines approaching, multiple vehicles racing down the ranch road. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? Another shot shattered the concrete wall near her head. Sarah closed her eyes and thought of her baby, of the choice she was making for both their futures. Some secrets were worth dying to expose. The sound of boots on metal stairs echoed through the lab. The cavalry had arrived. The underground laboratory felt different now, sterile and cold under the harsh fluorescent lights Detective Morrison had rigged up. Sarah watched from the metal stairs as crime scene technicians photographed every inch of the facility, their camera flashes illuminating decades of hidden horrors. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, where the baby had been unusually active since they'd returned to the ranch. "We found something else," Morrison called from the far corner of the lab. His voice carried a grim undertone that made Sarah's stomach clench. "Behind this panel." She descended the stairs carefully, Dr. Helena Chen beside her. They'd managed to keep Helena's identity hidden from the arriving officers, passing her off as Sarah's physician who'd come to check on her after the evening's trauma. The lie sat heavily on Sarah's conscience, but Helena's inside knowledge of Helix Corporation might be their only advantage. Morrison had pried open a concealed compartment in the laboratory wall. Inside, Sarah could see rows of small vials filled with various colored liquids, and beneath them, a metal briefcase. "Don't touch anything," Morrison warned as Sarah approached. "But look at this." He used a pen to point at labels on the vials. Each bore a date and a code. The most recent was dated just 3 months ago. "Someone's been using this place recently," Sarah whispered. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The experiments never stopped. Helena peered over Sarah's shoulder, her face pale in the artificial light. "Those codes match Helix's internal classification system. Sarah, these are current formulations. Whatever your grandmother was working on, someone's been continuing her research." A commotion from upstairs interrupted them. Heavy footsteps echoed through the barn above, followed by voices Sarah didn't recognize. Morrison's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. "Detective Morrison?" a voice called down the stairs. "FBI? We need to speak with you." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Helena grabbed her arm, fingers digging in with desperate intensity. "They found us," she whispered. Morrison motioned for them to stay back as he climbed the stairs. Sarah could hear muffled conversation above, growing more heated by the moment. When Morrison returned, his expression was thunderous. "They're ordering me to turn over all evidence," he said quietly, "citing national security. They want everyone out of here in 10 minutes. "We can't let them cover this up again," Sarah said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Too many people have died." Helena was already moving toward the briefcase. "If we're going to do something, it has to be now." She pulled out her phone and began photographing everything. The vials, the equipment, the documents scattered across the workbenches. "What are you doing?" Morrison hissed. "Insurance," Helena replied, her fingers flying over the phone's screen. "I'm uploading these to a secure server. If something happens to us, at least there will be a record." The footsteps above grew louder, more impatient. Sarah could hear her name being called. She thought of Marcus, still unconscious in the hospital, and of all the people who'd suffered because of her family's secrets. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. "There's something else you need to know," Helena said, still photographing. "About your baby." Sarah's hand flew to her stomach. "What about my baby?" "Your grandmother's research focused on genetic memory. The idea that traumatic experiences could alter DNA and be passed down through generations. But according to these notes, she believed the effect could be reversed, that a child born to someone with modified genetics might actually be enhanced." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're saying my baby has the potential to carry genetic modifications, yes, but also the potential to overcome them. Your grandmother seemed to believe that natural conception after genetic modification could create something extraordinary." Above them, the voices were getting closer. Morrison was checking his weapon, his face set in hard lines. "Ladies, we need to go, now." Helena pocketed her phone and grabbed several vials from the case. "Evidence," she said, when Morrison started to protest. "We need proof of what's been happening here." They climbed the stairs to find 3 men in dark suits waiting in the barn. The lead agent stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "Miss Wade, I'm Agent Collins with the FBI. We're going to need you to come with us for debriefing." "She's not going anywhere without a lawyer," Morrison said firmly. Agent Collins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't a request, Detective. Ms. Wade's safety is at risk. There are people who would kill to keep this information from becoming public." Sarah felt the baby kick hard against her ribs, as if responding to the tension in the room. She looked at Morrison, then at Helena, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. The photographs were uploaded. The truth was out there now, somewhere beyond the reach of these men in suits. "Then I guess we'd better make sure it does become public," Sarah said. The laboratory's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Maya clutched the USB drive containing decades of genetic research data. Behind her, flames crept along the wooden support beams of the barn above, and smoke was beginning to seep through the ceiling cracks. Dr. Elena Vasquez lay unconscious near the destroyed computer terminal, blood trickling from where debris had struck her head during the explosion. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Rodriguez. "Fire department en route. Get out now." But she couldn't leave Elena, despite everything the woman had done, despite the years of illegal experiments, the cover-ups, the attempts on Maya's life. Maya grabbed Elena under the arms and began dragging her toward the hidden exit, her pregnant belly making every movement awkward and strained. "You should have left when I warned you," Elena mumbled, regaining consciousness as Maya hauled her through the narrow tunnel that led to the old root cellar. "The fire, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Shut up and move," Maya gasped, her back screaming in protest. "We can sort out your guilt later." They emerged into the root cellar just as the barn above them groaned ominously. Maya could hear sirens in the distance, but they sounded too far away. She pushed Elena ahead of her, up the wooden steps and out into the night air. The entire barn was engulfed now, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky like grasping fingers. Maya felt the heat on her face as she stumbled away from the structure, Elena leaning heavily against her. "Maya!" She turned to see Marcus running toward them from the direction of the house, his face etched with relief and terror. Behind him came Sheriff Rodriguez and 2 of his deputies, along with Jake, who must have called for backup after she'd sent him away. "The lab," Maya panted as Marcus reached her. "It's all destroyed, but I have the files." She held up the USB drive with shaking hands. "That won't be enough," Elena said weakly. "The real evidence, the genetic samples, the test results, it's all in the fire now, and there are others involved. People with more power than you can imagine. Sheriff Rodriguez was already on his radio, coordinating with the fire department. Maya heard him mention something about hazardous materials and keeping the firefighters at a safe distance until they could assess what chemicals might be burning in the underground facility. "Who else?" Maya demanded, turning to Elena. "You said there were others. Who's been funding this?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "Your grandmother thought she was so clever, playing both sides, taking their money while secretly documenting everything they did. She never understood that some secrets are too dangerous to expose." A new voice cut through the night air. "Dr. Vasquez is quite right about that." Maya spun around to see a man in an expensive suit walking calmly toward them, flanked by two others who had the unmistakable bearing of professional security. How had they gotten past the sheriff's perimeter? "Mr. Aldrich," Elena breathed, and Maya heard genuine fear in her voice for the first time. The man smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Dr. Vasquez." "Miss Chen, I'm disappointed it's come to this. We had hoped the situation could be resolved more quietly." Sheriff Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand moving to his weapon. "Sir, this is an active crime scene. I need you to—" "Sheriff Rodriguez," Aldrich interrupted smoothly, producing an official-looking badge. "Federal jurisdiction, I'm afraid, will be taking custody of Dr. Vasquez and any materials recovered from the site." Maya clutched the USB drive tighter. "Like hell you will." "Maya," Marcus whispered urgently, "give them what they want. We can figure this out later." But Maya was thinking of her grandmother's journal, of the pages she'd read describing how corporations had used desperate families as test subjects, promising miracle cures while conducting illegal experiments. She thought of her own unborn child and what kind of world she wanted to bring them into. "No," she said louder this time. "This ends tonight." Before anyone could stop her, Maya yanked the USB drive from her jacket and hurled it into the blazing barn. The small device disappeared into the flames immediately, along with all the digital evidence of decades of genetic experimentation. "You little fool," Aldrich snarled, his composed facade cracking. "Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed?" "My grandmother's insurance policy," Maya replied. "And yours too." Elena started to laugh, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "She doesn't understand, does she? The files on that drive, they weren't just evidence of what we did. They contained the only viable genetic sequences we'd successfully isolated. 30 years of research, gone." Aldrich's face went white with rage, but before he could respond, the barn collapsed in on itself with a thunderous roar, sending sparks and embers spiraling up into the darkness. In that moment, Maya felt something shift inside her. Not the baby, but something deeper, a certainty that she'd made the right choice, even if she didn't yet understand all the consequences. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Maya stood on the porch, watching the FBI vehicles disappear down the dirt road. Dr. Reeves was in custody, his decades-long conspiracy finally exposed. The underground laboratory had been sealed, its contents catalogued as evidence in what would become one of the largest bioethics scandals in recent history. Sarah emerged from the house, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I still can't believe it's over," she said, settling into the weathered rocking chair beside Maya. "Is it, though?" Maya placed a protective hand over her rounded belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "The genetic modifications he made to our family line, they're still part of us, part of my child." Sarah reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "The doctors said the modifications were benign, enhanced immune systems, improved cellular repair. If anything, we're healthier because of them." Maya nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. The past month had been a whirlwind of medical tests, FBI interviews, and legal proceedings. The truth about their grandmother's involvement had been the hardest revelation to process. Eleanor hadn't been a victim. She'd been a willing participant, believing Reeves's promises about creating a superior human bloodline. "I keep thinking about what Grandma wrote in her journal," Maya said. "How she thought she was doing something noble, something that would benefit future generations. She was manipulated, Sarah replied firmly. Reeves preyed on her grief after losing our grandfather. He convinced her that genetic enhancement could prevent the heart disease that killed him. A pickup truck appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as it approached. Maya recognized Jake's vehicle and felt a familiar flutter of warmth in her chest. He'd been her anchor through everything, never wavering in his support, despite the chaos that had engulfed their lives. Jake parked near the house and jogged up the porch steps, his face bright with news. "The town council meeting went better than expected," he announced, kissing Maya's forehead. "The ranch is officially cleared of any legal complications. The property is yours, free and clear." Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. There had been concerns that the government might seize the land due to its connection to illegal experiments, but Jake's lawyer friend had worked tirelessly to ensure Maya retained ownership. "What about the laboratory?" Sarah asked. "Sealed permanently," Jake confirmed. "They've filled in the tunnels and plan to build a memorial garden above it, a place to honor the victims of Reeves's experiments." Maya stood slowly, her pregnancy making sudden movements difficult. "I want to see it one more time before they finish the memorial." They walked together toward the barn, now flanked by construction equipment and workers preparing the site. The entrance to the underground facility had been filled with concrete, erasing the physical reminder of the horrors that had taken place below. "Detective Morrison called this morning," Sarah said, as they stood where the hidden door had been. "3 more victims' families have come forward after seeing the news coverage. They're finally getting answers about their loved ones' disappearances." Maya felt tears sting her eyes. The scope of Reeves's crimes had continued to expand as the investigation progressed. 12 confirmed victims over 30 years, all chosen for specific genetic markers that made them valuable test subjects. "At least their families will have closure," she whispered. Jake wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly. "Our baby will grow up knowing the truth about our family history. No more secrets, no more lies." A construction worker approached them, hard hat in hand. "Ma'am, we're ready to plant the first memorial tree if you'd like to do the honors." Maya looked at the young oak sapling waiting to be planted, its roots wrapped carefully in burlap. This tree would grow above the buried laboratory, its branches reaching toward the sky while its roots anchored deep in soil that had witnessed both evil and redemption. She knelt carefully beside the prepared hole, her hands closing around the small shovel. As she broke the earth, Maya thought about the future. Her child would play in the shadow of this tree, never knowing the darkness that once festered below. The ranch would be a place of healing, not horror. "I want to turn the property into something positive," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "A research facility dedicated to ethical genetic therapy. We'll use Grandma's money, the blood money Reeves paid her, to fund legitimate medical research." Sarah smiled. She would have liked that. A chance for redemption. As the workers carefully lowered the sapling into the earth, Maya felt her baby kick strongly, as if approving of the decision. The sins of previous generations didn't have to define the future. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead was to ensure their suffering led to something beautiful. The oak tree stood straight and proud, its leaves rustling in the prairie wind, a living symbol of hope taking root in soil once poisoned by secrets.